Beneath the fluttering flags of the Republic of China, swaying in the storms of war and the ceaseless struggles for power, Li Zongren did not rise through thunderous slogans or fiery manifestos. He came from Guangxi, a province long seen as the periphery of central authority, bringing with him the demeanor of a pragmatic, sharp-minded general and a quiet ambition. To shape China's fate not through schemes drawn on paper, but by the marching of troops and cold decisions made amid smoke and fire. He was neither a philosopher nor a conqueror, but a product of his time, and, in many ways, a man who bent that time to his will through the strength of his own hands.
The article below has been compiled from many sources. If there are any mistakes, or if you know any interesting information, feel free to leave a comment so I can learn as well. Now, let's begin the article.
The Wind of the Guangxi Mountains, Li Zongren's childhood. There were no silk cradles, no epic tales told by lamplight. Li Zongren's childhood began with the howling wind of the Wuling Mountains and the hurried footsteps of a chaotic era. His hometown, Guilin, was neither a capital nor a place of splendor. It was a land encircled by rocky peaks and barren soil, where people had to grit their teeth and survive amid a harsh natural world and a decaying dynasty. His father, a low-ranking official in the waning Qing bureaucracy, was a quiet man, not highly educated, but firmly devoted to discipline. His mother died early. In a modest household, the young Li bore the burden of self-reliance from an early age. Perhaps because of this, he learned to observe in silence, and when he did speak, his words were often as brief and firm as a military command. People say that as a boy, Zongren would sit for hours by the banks of the Li River, eyes fixed on the passing bands of roving martial performers and mercenary soldiers. Not because he relished war, but because he understood that in a world where officials were weak and laws were distant, only a gun could truly determine a man's fate. That boy did not dream of being a sage. He wanted to understand how the world worked. When Li Zongren was 10, Guangxi was swept into the whirlpool of peasant uprisings and power struggles among local warlords. One night, his home was completely looted. His father barely managed to drag his son out through the back alley, still clutching the county's tax ledger. That night, beneath the sliver of a crescent moon, young Li understood. No one would come to protect the people. If one wanted to survive, one had to rise on their own. From that moment on, he let go of dreams of peace. He did not pursue the civil service exams, nor did he embrace poetry or letters. He chose the path of gunpowder, not out of bloodlust, but because he knew only with real power in hand could one earn a seat at the table where fate was bargained. And from those hard, unforgiving years, a cold, calculating strategist began to take shape, not in the halls of academia, but in the dust of war and the long unrest that shadowed his entire youth. Coming of age in fire, a young man amidst chaos. Li Zongren entered his 20s not with dreams, but with duty. The entire nation was like a chessboard thrown into disarray, where the youth no longer had time to ask why, only time to act in response to the call of their era. In 1911, the Xinhai Revolution broke out. At the time, the young man from Guilin had just stepped out of school, but one thing was already clear to him. The old era was rotting. The Confucian scholars were no longer the ideal. People now admired rifles and republican ideals. Li Zongren did not stand apart. He enlisted in the military, first attending the Guilin Military Academy, then the Guangxi Military Academy. It didn't take long for him to realize this was not just a place to learn how to fire a gun. It was where people learned how to survive, how to claw for every inch of influence amid the rise of warlordism. In his early military years, Li did not stand out for ruthlessness or hunger for power, but for his composure. While other young officers basked in the intoxication of victory and political slogans, he quietly observed, analyzing every relationship, every shift within the fractured structure of the central government. From an obscure lieutenant, he gradually rose to command. But for Li Zongren, that was never the destination. He had little taste for rousing speeches and held no faith in hollow idealism. In a world where today's ally could become tomorrow's enemy, he learned his first great lesson in Chinese military politics of the early 20th century. To survive, one must not pick a side too soon, but pick the right moment. So he waited, patient as the Rocky Mountains of Guilin, waiting for the perfect moment to step into the ruthless game of his time. The silent man, amid the storm, entering the Northern Expedition, 1926. All of southern China trembled. Chiang Kai-shek, then a far less known name compared to Lu Xun or Sun Yat-sen, had now risen to lead the monumental Northern Expedition. Its goal, to crush the warlords and unify China under steel and the banner of the Kuomintang. Among the surging tide of troops heading to battle, one man marched with steady steps, Li Zongren, by now one of the key generals of the National Revolutionary Army. He lacked the flamboyance of Bai Chongxi and the prominence of Chen Cheng, but what Li brought to the campaign was something rare: steadiness, composure, and a political vision unclouded by the frenzy of ambitious wolves. He wasn't one to be swept up in the spectacle of victory. While other commanders rushed for glory, as the expedition struck at Wuhan or Nanchang, Li Zongren quietly secured the rear, stabilized supply lines, and ensured order in occupied regions. He understood a battle could earn newspaper headlines, but a campaign demanded months of quiet, sweating labor. In 1927, he led the successful assault against the warlord Wu Peifu at Hankou, a stunning military triumph. But instead of standing before the cameras, he stepped back, letting Chiang Kai-shek claim the spotlight. Not out of weakness, but because he knew that in those moments, victory itself was not the prize worth holding on to. It was his standing in the army and the hearts of the people. From then on, Li Zongren's prestige in the Guangxi military rose rapidly. But he did not overreach. He did not carve out a private kingdom. He did not declare himself a warlord. Instead, he chose careful cooperation with the central government, avoiding direct confrontation with Chiang Kai-shek, but never submitting blindly either. It was a tightrope walk over a chasm, one that only the most clear-headed could survive when the winds turned violent. People often said Li Zongren was not the kind to lead a revolution. He didn't burn with idealism, nor did he shout stirring slogans, but he had something else: a deep and intimate understanding of China, a country still haunted by fear of chaos, unfamiliar with democracy, and in need of someone cold-headed enough to hold the helm when the waters boiled. And Li Zongren, in his own way, had begun to become that man, not with red-stained flags, but with eyes that saw farther than those lost in the smoke of war and victory. Between power and shadow, Li Zongren in the political maelstrom. After the smoke of the northern expedition had cleared and Chiang Kai-shek stood atop the summit of power, many believed China had finally found its master. But in Guangxi, the southern frontier, another force was quietly gathering. It did not rise with declarations or thunderous speeches, but through the quiet accumulation of strength. That force was Li Zongren, the silent, pragmatic general. He had once fought alongside Chiang, a key contributor to the cause of national unification. But as politics replaced the battlefield, their differences became increasingly clear. Chiang sought total control. Li was not one to surrender easily. In Guangxi, he built his own power base, not in open defiance, but through a quiet refusal to submit. Li Zongren did not grandstand. He did not seek the spotlight. But every move he made, reorganizing the army, reforming administration, investing in infrastructure, served to strengthen his grip on the region. He didn't need to secede. Guangxi, under his stewardship, had already become a parallel center of power. In 1929, tensions with Chiang turned into an irreparable rift. Chiang struck first, but Li did not fight back with guns. Instead, he withdrew quietly to Guangxi, preparing for a longer game. It was not surrender, but patience, waiting for the tides to shift. Some labeled him an opportunist, but to those who knew him, Li was simply a man who understood the cost of loyalty placed in the wrong hands. In the stormy currents of Chinese politics, he knew survival often mattered more than momentary victory. He did not make noise. He did not occupy grand titles. Yet his name always stirred caution in Nanjing's corridors of power. And when the Second Sino-Japanese War erupted, those who had assumed he had retreated once more saw Li Zongren emerge from the shadows, ready again to shape China's fate. Return from the shadows, Li Zongren and the triumphal march at Xuzhou. 1937. The roar of artillery shook Shanghai to its core. China had entered full-scale war with Japan, plunging into chaos and despair. This was no longer a time for calculating status or factional lines, and in that moment of crisis, one name surfaced from the lips of none other than Chiang Kai-shek himself, Li Zongren. Few believed Li would respond, and yet he returned, not with demands, not with negotiations, but simply by appearing at the front lines as a soldier, nothing more. He was entrusted with the defense of Xuzhou, a city many believed impossible to hold under the weight of Japan's military machine. But it was there that Li proved why he remained one of China's most formidable strategists, a man who did not need fanfare to win a war. Under his command, the Fifth Army held their ground for weeks, killing tens of thousands of Japanese troops, slowing the enemy's advance, and buying precious time for the nationalist government to prepare for a prolonged struggle. Newspapers that had once labeled him a retreater now hailed him as the hero of Xuzhou. And yet, after the victory, he withdrew once more. He did not leverage his fame for political power. He did not step onto the stage of glory. He returned to Guangxi as if he had never left, as if triumph needed no recognition. For Li Zongren, glory was not in applause or titles, but in the silence of someone who had long understood the fleeting nature of power. It rises swiftly and fades just as fast, unless one knows when to step back. As the war dragged on and the nationalist government fled to Chongqing, Chiang Kai-shek once again found himself looking south, toward the man he had once struggled to control, and now, in China's darkest hour, represented a beacon of steady hope. Between two fires, Li Zongren and the turning point. After the war, 1945. The guns fell silent in Asia. The Japanese Empire had surrendered. The people of China believed that dawn had come after 8 long years of bloodshed. But reality was far more brutal. In the power vacuum left behind by the Japanese, two forces, once calling themselves allies in the war against Japan, now stared at each other as mortal enemies. The nationalists and the communists had returned to the inevitable path: civil war. And once again, Chiang Kai-shek turned to Li Zongren. But this time, Li was no longer the solitary general standing on the periphery. He was now hailed as a hero of the War of Resistance, carrying military prestige, popular support, and more importantly, a silent backing from the entire southern region. Guangxi, where he had once built his base like an independent warlord, now served as a political shield, allowing him to speak truths no one else in the Kuomintang dared to utter. He didn't oppose Chiang with bullets. He opposed him with silence, with slow, deliberate nods at meetings, with eyes that questioned the logic behind a renewed war he believed was suicidal. Li Zongren harbored no illusions about the Communist Party, but neither did he believe that gunfire was the only way to save China. For a brief time, he tried to be the bridge. Peace talks, power sharing, temporary alliances. These were the options he proposed. But Chiang rejected them all, gripped by a fear of losing his supreme position. By 1948, as the Civil War tilted against the nationalists, Chiang was forced to find a neutral figure to whom he could relinquish some power. That figure was none other than Li Zongren. He became the acting president of the Republic of China, a veteran soldier elevated to the political summit just as the ship of state was breaking apart, with water rushing in from every direction. There was no grand inauguration, no cheers or celebrations. Only Li, alone in the quiet of the presidential office, staring at the map of China and asking himself, how do you save a nation that no longer wants to be saved? The final chapter of a soldier, Li Zongren and the years in exile. In 1949, the Kuomintang collapsed across the front. The People's Liberation Army marched into Nanjing. Chiang Kai-shek retreated to Taiwan, carrying with him the remnants of the Republic of China's government. But Li Zongren, the man then holding the office of acting president, did not go with him. He did not flee. But neither did he wish to remain caught between two ideological giants, neither of whom were willing to listen. A year later, he departed for the United States, not as a refugee, but as a man quietly stepping off the political stage. An old soldier living out his days on unfamiliar streets, writing memoirs, reading books, and occasionally meeting with the overseas Chinese community. He never openly opposed Chiang, but he made no effort to hide his disillusionment. In private letters, Li wrote that the Kuomintang had lost its soul the moment power overshadowed its founding ideals. As for the Communist Party, he remained wary, but also admitted they had managed to touch the hearts of the peasantry, something the Kuomintang had never truly achieved. In 1965, more than a decade after his political exile, Li Zongren returned to his homeland, this time to the Chinese mainland. The new government welcomed him as a patriotic personage, but everyone understood he had not come back for status, nor for politics. He returned as an old man, wishing to sleep his final sleep on the soil of Guilin, where he had once chased crickets over hills, once walked through morning mist on the path that would make him a soldier. There is no monument bearing his name. No school teaches about him as a national hero. Yet in the memories of those who once knew of Li Zongren, the image still echoes, of a man who once stood at the boundary between two worlds, who once tried to stop the blood from flowing, even knowing he would fail. He died in 1969 amidst the turbulence of the Cultural Revolution. No fanfare, no state funeral. Only an old soldier closing the chapter of his life the same way he had always lived it, in silence and with honesty.
Thank you all for following and listening. If you enjoyed and found it interesting, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for our upcoming videos.